One of the really interesting things about building Akka 3 services is how you do that. And how you do that is with the components that are part of the software development kit, the SDK. There's 6 types of components, and here I'm going to cover, kind of provide an overview of all 6 of these components and dive into a little bit of the detail of how they work and how they interact with each other. The thing I think that's kind of cool about this approach to building software is that to me it feels a little bit like one analogy is it's like you have a service is a big molecule, and each molecule is in chemistry. If you're not familiar with chemistry, molecules in chemistry are composed of atoms. So the atoms here, the service is the molecule. The atoms that make up the molecule are the components that make up a service. And just for fun, just another analogy, because I'm a big fan of Minecraft, is that the thing that's amazing to me about the game of Minecraft is that it's all based on building things with these 3-meter square blocks. You're in this 3-dimensional virtual world that you can travel through, but you can build virtually anything. Just you're only limited by your imagination. And if you look at some of the structures that people have built, there's just thousands of videos on YouTube with these amazing, elegant, beautiful structures that people have built using these simple building blocks. In Minecraft, I feel like it's the same thing with Akka 3. You build these amazing services that can do amazing things with these simple building blocks. So the bulk of the time I'm going to spend in this video is in this diagram. It's more of an interaction diagram. It's not a design diagram, say, of a single service, although a design diagram might look like this, because what I'm showing here are the different component types and how they interact with each other. So I'm going to go through each of the ones. So first, it's just a quick tour, just to give you kind of the lay of the land and the labeling and everything. These symbols represent endpoints. It's pretty obvious, so EP, endpoint. There's an HTTP and a gRPC endpoint. And then the CON is for consumer. It's another one of the very important components. Then we have the entities. There are 2 types of entities. There's an event source entity, and there's a key value entity. And then we have views. So views are where data is stored in a way that's readable. That you can do SQL-like queries against the data that gets stored into those. And continuing on, there's workflows. And then I think I've covered everything except the timers, or they're called timed actions. So I've walked through 8 components, but like the previous diagram here, there's 6 component types, but there's 2 specific types of entities, and there's 2 specific types of endpoints. So if we look, the lines represent the interactions between these components. So for example, you have an HTTP endpoint. It can get HTTP requests, and those requests can be forwarded, or not forwarded, but sent to, in turn, as a result of getting those requests, it can send commands or requests to different components. So I'm showing 4 different types of interactions. You can have HTTP or gRPC endpoints. You get a request, it could send a command to an event source entity, or a key value entity, or a workflow, or it could send a request to perform a query. So that's what these different endpoints do. And just a quick dive into the code, you can see, here's just a kind of a quick example. This is in the documentation of the implementation of an endpoint. And I'm not going to dwell on this a lot because I'm going to be doing individual videos on each of these different component types. I think they deserve their own videos. But just as a quick introduction, you see you're defining an endpoint. It has a certain path, and then you can have different operations like get and post. But the big thing here is you can see there's this component client for an event source entity, and it's calling a method on this specific class and this specific method. In this case, it's just retrieving the current state of, say, a shopping cart. And this other endpoint is put. So it's doing an HTTP. It received an HTTP put request. Here it's using the component client to make a call to an event source entity based on an entity ID. It's calling a different method on the shopping cart add item, and then it's passing the item to be added. That's the command basically that's being added. So that's one example. Key value, I'm sorry, let's just take a look at gRPC. gRPC is a little bit different. You have to define a service definition using protobufs. Here's a kind of a simple example of the definition of protobuf. It's a language agnostic definition of a service. That protobuf file is then used to generate a file that is used to build a gRPC endpoint. But basically, it's the same type of thing. You're getting requests into the gRPC component, and then it's doing things like it's using the component compliant again to do, say, a call to an event source entity. So that's a quick look at the HTTP. Now, there's the consumer component down here, number 3, is it can be used in many different ways, and I'm going to try and show some of the more common ones here in this example. But you can see here the consumer is consuming messages from a topic. So if we jump into a code example for this, we can see that we've got a component definition is a class, counter event, it's consuming that, and it has a component ID, but you can see there's a consume annotation here where it's saying it's consuming from topic, and it names the topic. And then these events that are coming in from the topic trigger calls to these methods. Like if it's a value increase message, it will invoke this method. If it's a value multiplied, it will invoke this method. Now, this sample code doesn't show using component client, but typically that's what you would see here is the component client. The main point is you can have a consumer that's consuming from different types of topics. So if we get into the event source entity, just a quick example here, this is really, the entities are where the actual business logic really happens. And this is just a quick example of an event source entity. The main thing I wanted to show here, though, is here's a request coming in to add the line item, and you can see that it's doing a little bit of validation to make sure that the request is okay. But the main thing is happening down here in this code where it's saying return effect.persist event. So this event was created based on the incoming command, and then it's getting persisted into an event journal. That's really all it takes in this code to do it. Key value is a little bit different in that it's not doing event driven. All it's doing is it has a key and a value, and requests come in, and those requests change the state. So you can see instead of persist event, it's just doing an update state in this one part here. So this is where the state is updated and persisted to durable storage. Moving on, workflows. Of course, workflows, as you might expect, you do multiple steps operations. So you can see there's a step. What we're doing is we're doing a withdraw. We're calling an entity to do a withdraw. And then we set up for the next step, like which is the next step, transition to deposit. And then we have another step here, which is the step deposit. It's using the component client. Now it's interacting with some other entity to do a deposit type of operation. And then it ends the workflow. That's kind of how it is. And when you set up a workflow, you define your steps, and then you build the workflow, and you're adding all the steps into it. But the steps themselves decide what is the next step, which is your transition to. So this allows for conditional step flows based on the behavior of each step. But this is just a quick introduction to a workflow. But the main thing I want to show here, though, is that it was the endpoint that called the workflow that triggered it to do something. It was the endpoint that called the key value or the event source entity to do some type of work. Or it's a message coming in from a topic, and that consumer is performing some kind of operation like doing a query from a view or triggering a workflow, or sending a command to an event source entity. So it's these types of things where things happen. So the next one is a view. Now views have multiple parts, where in this case, it's a view that is consuming from a topic. So views have basically two parts. There's a part that defines the query. You can see the SQL command here. But then there's a consumer built into every view. The view is built up by consuming data coming from other components. So here we can see that we're consuming from a topic, and then just like what we saw before, those messages coming from the topic then trigger updates to the, you can see there's return effect update row down here. So that's how the views work. With there's a query part and there's a consumer part. So where are we? The next one is another form of a consumer, is where you have, say, a workflow called an event source entity. That event source entity is emitting events. Of course, those events are important for the event source entity itself because the events trigger state changes. But the consumer can also be a subscriber to events coming from an event source entity. So I showed you a consumer subscribing to a topic. Here you have a consumer that's subscribing, you can see from an event source entity. And it's just processing the events, which would be, normally you're doing something like using the component client to perform some kind of operation, sending a command to some different entity. So that's just a quick example of another type of consumer. But the big thing that I think is really cool here is that, and this is really one of my favorite things of using the Akka components, is these event-driven stream flows. So here in this example in the diagram, I've got this entity up at the top left. It's emitting events that a consumer consumes. The consumer transforms those incoming events into commands that go to another entity. That entity does its process, it emits events, and another consumer is consuming those events, transforming the commands to go to another entity of some kind. It could be an event source entity or key value entity. It's these kinds of, it's very easy to build these kinds of event-driven types of flows with the SDK, with these components. I think this is programming on a level that you've probably never seen before, but for me personally, with 5 decades of development, I've never seen something like this, and I never want to go back to the old imperative ways of writing code. I just love writing code in this way. I think there's just no comparison to it. So I just want to show you another consumer. Consumers can also produce out to other things. So a consumer can consume from a topic, but it can also produce to a topic. So say, for example, you have the entity here in this diagram. We had this event source entity that's emitting events, and we need to push those events out to a topic so that some external system can consume it. Well, that's what a consumer can do. It can consume the events from the event source entity and produce events that go out to some kind of external topic. A couple more things. You can have, say, workflows or endpoints or consumers make calls to external systems. So there's a quick example here where you can use a HTTP client. So this is dependency injection. Some of the components can be injected, and this happens by the Akka runtime. The Akka runtime will inject these components or these things into your component. So here we need to use not only a component client, but an HTTP client. So the HTTP client can be used to do some kind of HTTP operation out to some external service. You can see down here at this line, it's doing an HTTP post with a request, and it's quite powerful, so you can make these HTTP requests out to other systems. And then last but not least is the timers, or timed actions. And these are very interesting. I think the one really good use case for it is when you are dealing with external systems, maybe you send some kind of request to an external system and you're expecting response back, but you don't know when you're going to get the response. So either you're going to get the response back from it or you're going to time out. So timers are fairly easy to set up. You can use this timer scheduler to set up a deferred like component client call. So you can see we're using this time scheduler, give it a name of some type, how far into the future should this operation occur, and then when the timer pops, it's going to do this component client call. And then there's a timed action that receives that call when it happens. So you can see that here it is, the timed action. You can see that you have this timed action component, and it receives that delayed call, which then it in turn does some kind of a component client call, say to a key value entity. So that's how the timed actions work. So I know this was a quick overview, but this is the general ways things work, is that you have things like the entities that do specific work. You have the inputs coming from endpoints or from topics through consumers. You have the different components like these entities or workflows for, say, doing work, performing work, conducting business logic. You have the views for reading data, retrieving data in some kind of a queryable way. And then you have the timed actions. But all these things, these are the building blocks that you use to build services using Akka 3. The nice thing is that the more you understand and kind of build your intuition and understanding of how these components work and how they can be integrated with each other, the simpler it is. There's a nice pattern, there's a nice rhythm to the way you build these services. The big thing also is that these things, the reason why they talk to each other indirectly, where they're not making, say, method calls from one component to another, is because these things run in a distributed environment, so that your service isn't constrained to run into, say, a single JVM. It can run across 2, 3, 5, 10, 100 JVMs. This is where Akka 3 gives you that scale for free. And it's a very, very powerful capability. I came across this video. The theme of the video is define your wins. I'll have a link in the description of this video. But I really liked it as I was watching the video. It's like I felt like it was describing the feeling that you get when you're writing components. You're forced to break down your system into these different components, and you work on each component one by one by one, and you get the sense of accomplishments, I think, as you're doing this. In the video, I think they talk about it. You get that endorphin hit. Oh yeah, another one done, another one done, another one done. Like you say, you get that rhythm going. So it's a fun, interesting way to think about how to do software development. So that's it. The overview. You can find the documentation. It's very easy to find documentation on all the different components. If you go to akka.io, go into developing, and then click on components, and you can see there's links to all the different kinds of components. So if you want to look at views, you just click in, and you're in the documentation for that kind of component. So I hope you found this video useful. There's links into the Akka documentation, or the Akka, the high-level kind of overview of Akka, as well as the detailed developer documentation through these two different QR codes. Please like and subscribe. Keep learning, and I hope to see you in another one.